Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm Paul, I'm with the Dicey Review, and tonight we're going to be learning how to play the 2 to 6 player game, The Hunger, designed by Richard Garfield and released by Renegade Games in the US. The Hunger comes with all of the components that you see here, including one game board, the pieces to assemble one hunt track based on the number of players, and the player components for 6 different players. These player components consist of vampire sheets, 6 starting decks of 6 cards each, and 6 wooden vampire and score tokens. The game also comes with 1 moon token, 5 castle tiles, 26 bonus tokens, 50 mission tiles, 122 total hunt cards, and 3 rose cards. The cards in the hunt deck will consist of familiar cards, vampire powers, and different types of humans. There are also some cards included in the game that have an A in the top right corner. This is to indicate that this is a rookie mode card. We'll go into details about the rookie mode at the end of the video. Each character's starting deck will consist of the same 6 cards. The starting cards are marked with an S in the top right corner, and the character that the starting cards belongs to is in the bottom left window frame. To begin setup, place the game board in the middle of the table. The game board is double-sided. One side will have an A in the bottom left corner, and this is for the rookie game mode. The other side of the game board will have a B in the bottom left corner, and this is for the standard game mode known as the Elder mode. We'll be learning the Elder mode in this video. Next, each player will pick a vampire and take their vampire sheet, their starting deck, and their vampire token and score token. They'll place the score token on the 0 space of the score track. Then, take all of the hunt cards with the exception of the roses and shuffle them together, including the cards marked with an A for the rookie mode. Once this is done, this will create a hunt deck. Then you'll need to assemble the hunt track based on your player count. You need to have one more row than the number of players, so in our 2-player example, we'll have a hunt track consisting of 3 rows. Once the hunt deck is created, you could place it face down near the hunt track. Next, take all of the bonus tokens and place them along all the spaces on the board with a treasure chest. If the treasure chest is open, place the bonus tile face up. Once this is done, any remaining bonus tokens can be placed back in the box. Then place the 3 rose cards face up on the labyrinth space of the board. Then draw 3 cards from the hunt deck and place them face down on the tavern space of the game board. Place the moon token on the first space of the turn order track. Then place the castle tokens on the castle depending on the player count. In a 2-player game, you'll just use the 10 and the 6 token, with the 10 being on top of the 6. Next, we'll set up the missions on the board, and when you're playing with a 2 to 4 player game, make sure and remove any missions that say 5+. Then take all of the remaining missions with a beige background, not a gold background. Shuffle all of those missions up, and then place 2 of those missions face up on the public mission space in the top left of the board. Then take all of the remaining missions and mix them together. From those shuffled missions, each player will draw 2 mission tiles, choose one to keep, and then discard the other one back to the box without showing the other players. Then the players will place 6 of these mission tiles face down on the indicated space in the mountains, 5 mission tiles on each of the crypt spaces in the plains, and 4 mission tiles on both of the crypt spaces in the forest. Any remaining mission tiles will be placed back in the box. Then each player will shuffle their deck of cards and draw 3 cards to form their starting hand. Each player will add up the speed value on all of their cards, and whichever vampire has the lowest speed will play first, and the fastest vampire will play last. If there's a tie, the oldest player will play first, so in this example, the yellow player will go first as they are older. Place the player markers on the starting space near the castle tile with the first player on top. Finally, draw 1 hunt card for each row of the hunt track, and place them in the leftmost column. After this has been done, you're ready to play. In the Hunger, players have exactly 15 turns to travel around the countryside and try and do a number of different things. Players can hunt and add better cards to their deck. They can visit different locations on the board to claim treasures or take special actions. And they can also gather mission tiles to hopefully complete to get more victory points at the end of the game. But players have to be careful because if they're not able to make it back to the cemetery before the end of the game, then they're burned to ashes and won't get any victory points. On the game board there are 4 distinct regions: the plains, the forest, the mountains, and the cemetery. These regions will matter for turn order, for some bonuses during the game, and determining end-game scoring. In the Hunger, each round will consist of the same steps. At the start of every round, you'll need to determine the turn order. For the first round of the game, turn order is determined during setup. In later turns of the game, it will always be the vampire who's farthest away from the castle that will play first. Players in the forest will go before players in the plains, and players in the plains will go before players in the mountain, and so on. If players are in the same region, players on the road will always play before players on the railroad, and any player who's on the boat path will go last behind any player on the railroad or on the road. And if players are in the same region and on the same path, whichever player is closest to the labyrinth would go first. So in this example, the blue player would go first. And just like at the start of the game during setup, if there's a stack of player tokens, the player on top would go first. Once turn order for the round has been determined, players will then complete all of their actions starting with the first player until everybody has had a turn. After turn order is determined on a player's turn, they'll take 3 steps before their turn is over. First, they must play and activate any cards that they have in their hand. Then, once players have activated all their cards, they'll determine their speed by adding up the numbers in the top left of each card. Players will then use their speed value to move their pawns around the board and hunt for better cards to add to their deck. After doing all of this, a player would discard any cards in their display that aren't permanent cards, and we'll talk about permanent cards more later in the video, and activate any potential end-of-turn effects on any cards, which we'll also discuss later in the video. They would draw 3 cards from their deck, and if they don't have enough in their deck to draw, they would shuffle their discard pile to draw more cards, and then they would flip their player token to its resting side to show that their turn was over. When a player takes their turn, they would lay all of the cards in their hand face up in their playing area. All of the card effects have to be resolved one at a time, but it's important to note that you can resolve them in any order. This is important because some cards may allow you to discard other cards that you don't want to trigger during your turn. You always have to resolve your discard or draw effects first, and then you can resolve your other cards. So for instance, this Vampire Strength would allow you to draw 1 card if you have a human in your playing area. In the starting deck, players won't have any humans, but let's say this were the case. Since there were a human in the playing area, this card would be able to trigger and allow you to draw 1 more card that you would then have a chance to resolve as well. There are also some cards that will allow you to discard. You can only discard cards that haven't been activated yet on your turn. So in our previous example, if this card allowed you to draw this card, you could discard any one of these other 2 cards, but you couldn't discard this one because it's already been activated during your turn. If at any point you need to draw a card but your draw deck is empty, you would simply shuffle your discard pile and make a new deck to draw from. After activating all of the cards in your face-up display, you would then calculate and spend your speed. Speed is calculated by adding all of the numbers in the top left corner of all of your cards. So in this example, this player would have a speed of 9. Speed is used to move your vampire and then hunt. Let's look at moving your vampire first. Players are never forced to move unless a card's effect tells them to, and if a player's speed is 0 or if it's negative, they can't move, and they wouldn't trigger a benefit from a space that they stay on. If players have a positive number, they can pick one direction to move, and a player can use all or part of their movement. Players can change directions at an intersection, but a player can't move forward and then back on the same path in the same turn. Once a player has moved the number of spaces that they want to, they'll trigger a benefit based on where they land. It's important to note that passing a space won't trigger a benefit. Only landing on a space will allow a player to trigger the benefit from that action space. So in this instance, if this player decides to use 6 of their movement, they could move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spaces, and then trigger the benefit of this treasure chest where they land. If a player lands on a space with another vampire token, that player is allowed to push them one at a time, starting with the one on the top, to an adjacent space if they wish. So for instance, this player could push this vampire back a space. And it's important to note that if there are multiple vampires, they don't have to be pushed to the same space. So for instance, this player could push this vampire here, and then this vampire here if they wanted to. Any vampire that's in the cemetery can't be pushed. If a vampire decides not to push any other players, they simply put their token on top of the other players on that space. Now that we've talked about movement, let's look at the different rewards that you would get from landing on a space of the board. If a player lands on a treasure chest space, they would immediately take any bonus token that still remains. They would place it face up on one of the spaces of their player board and immediately score 2 victory points. There's no limit to the number of bonus tokens that a player can have, and bonus tokens will have many different effects that we'll go over later in the video. If a player lands on a crypt space, they would be able to take more mission tiles. If a player lands on a crypt tile, they would take all of the available missions to look through. The player would then need to replace all but one of those tiles back on the board. So for instance, since there were 5 bonus tiles on this space, the player would need to replace 4 of them. It's important to note that players can freely replace and exchange mission tiles that they already had at the start of the game. So for instance, this player started with this tile at the start of the game, but if they wanted to, they could take these 2 tiles and return 4 to this space. The 4 tiles include one of their starting missions. In this way, the player has gained a new mission tile and replaced their starting mission tile. It's important to note that there are also missions with a gold color background. These missions can be discarded immediately during the game to provide a powerful benefit. If a player ends their movement on one of the 4 spaces depicting one of the card type colors, the mansion, the barracks, the church, or the market, the players could digest 1 card of the indicated type. For instance, the players could digest this type of card if they went to the market. The reason that this is desirable is this would get rid of the card and you wouldn't have to draw it anymore, and some of these cards can have negative effects for the player. Any card that's been digested will go below the player's player screen in their digest zone. This card will still count for missions or end-of-game effects, but it won't be shuffled back into the player's deck. If a player ends their movement on the labyrinth space, the player would be able to gain one of the roses of their choice for no cost. This would count as a hunt action, so the players wouldn't be able to hunt at the end of this turn. And we'll cover hunting in detail in a moment. If a player's movement ends in the cemetery, they can't hunt humans while they're in the cemetery, but vampires also can't be pushed while they're in the cemetery spaces. Players can't hunt on the castle space. Any player that makes it to the castle would immediately take the highest valued victory point chip and gain that many victory points. Once a player comes back to the castle, they can't leave the castle for the rest of the game. And it's important to note that there is a well in the castle space. If a player ends their movement on the tavern, they can hunt all of the cards in the tavern by spending 2 movement. This would be instead of hunting on the hunting track. It's important to note that you don't look at these cards until someone hunts at this space, and you have to take all of these cards when hunting at the tavern. If a player ends their movement on a well space, they would have an extra hunt for this turn. But this extra hunt action could only be used to hunt cards that are in the 1 column on the farthest right space of the hunt track. So for instance, a player could hunt from the 3 or 2 column and then use their extra hunt to hunt anything that might be in the 1 column. And finally, if players are on a ship space, they can't take a hunt action. Now that we've talked about movement and the board locations in detail, let's look at the third portion of a player's turn, hunting. If a player has any speed left over after moving, that player could then spend that speed to hunt 1 time, taking one of the cards from either the 3 column, the 2 column, or a card or stack of cards from the 1 column. So for instance, a player could spend 3 speed to hunt this human from this column of the hunt track. Each human that you hunt from the track is worth a number of victory points that you gain immediately as soon as you hunt that card, plus you would gain a bonus for each human that you hunt depending on where you are on the board. If a player hunts a human while they're in the plains, they gain +1 victory point for every human that they hunt. And if a player hunts in the forest, they would gain +2 victory points for every human that they hunt. These points would be gained immediately when the card is acquired. Throughout the course of the game, there may be multiple cards that pile up on one of the 1 spaces of the hunt track. If you spend 1 speed to hunt this space, you have to take all of the cards that are in this space. And it's important to note that you would gain a bonus for each of the humans that you hunt from this space. So for instance, if a player in the plains were hunting this stack, they would gain 2 extra victory points, 1 point as a bonus for each human card that they take. It's also important to note that some cards will give you negative effects if you hunt them in specific areas. For instance, this card would give you -2 victory points if you hunt it while you're in the forest. Any cards that you hunt would go directly into your discard pile. Any unspent speed is lost after a hunt. Players can't move after they've hunted. After all players have played one turn, you'll carry out these tasks to prepare for the next round of the game. First, move the moon round marker one space to the right. Then flip all of the vampire markers to their face-up side. Then move all of the remaining hunt cards on the track one column to the right. Any cards moving into the one column will simply stack on top of any cards already existing in that column. And as long as it's not turn 15, the last turn in the game, you would draw 3 new cards for the third column. Then, if there are no vampires at the tavern and there are less than 3 cards, you would draw and deal 1 card to that space. After this has been done, players would play a new round, starting with determining turn order. Now that we've talked about the full aspect of a player turn in detail in the game round, I would like to highlight a couple of card types. The game will include familiar cards that have a purple background. Familiars have a permanent effect, meaning they're not discarded at the end of your turn. They'll stay in your playing area and give you benefits each turn unless you choose to discard them for a listed effect. You would benefit from their effect and any speed that they might have every turn. There are also permanent cards that might have a negative effect. For instance, this card says that a player has to use their speed to move towards the nearest well, but this card also has an end of turn effect which you can trigger at the end of your turn if the condition has been met. This would allow you to discard this card if you've gotten to a well. The end of the game will be triggered on the 15th round. Then victory points will be awarded depending on if players have made it back to the cemetery or the castle. If players are able to make it back to one of the 3 cemetery spaces, they would each lose 5 victory points, but they would be able to take cover in the nearest vault and be considered to win the game. Any vampire that's made it back to the castle is completely safe and can also be considered to win the game. Any vampire that hasn't made it to at least the cemetery are burned to ashes by the sun and can't be considered to win the game. They can count their victory points, but just for the glory of it. Players would then score victory points for a number of different things. First, they would gain points for any end-of-game bonuses for the cards that they've collected. For instance, this card would give points for the number of wolf symbols collected, and this card would give points for the types of humans that were hunted. It's important to remember that humans that have been digested would still count for bonuses such as these. Players would then gain points if they've met either or both of the goals on the public missions, and then players would be able to reveal any missions that they might have completed on their personal board as well and gain victory points for those. The player with the most victory points would win, and if there's a tie, the player who got to the castle first or got closest to the castle would be the winner. I want to briefly talk about bonus tokens that you can collect during the game. Each of these bonus tokens is going to give you 2 victory points immediately when you pick it up. But many of the tokens will also have actions that you can use on your turn by flipping these tokens over on your player board to show that they've been used. For instance, any token showing extra movement can be flipped to add speed to your hunt or movement for this turn. If you see a token that has this symbol, you can flip this over to hunt 1 extra time this turn. This symbol would allow you to gain 1 extra mission from a stack of missions as if you were on that space. This symbol would simply allow you to draw 1 card and add it to your playing area. This symbol would allow you to discard 1 card and then draw 1 card. Bonus tokens with these symbols would allow you to gain 2 extra victory points when you collect the tokens, so 4 whenever you pick them up. And then there are also tokens that show these symbols. These symbols would add to cards that would grant you end-game bonuses. For instance, this symbol would count as a blue human and boost any cards at the end of the game that give you bonuses for that color of humans. They would also count when trying to determine majorities of this type. This token can count as 1 extra human of the type of your choice you get to choose at the end of the game. It can be used across multiple missions and cards, but you can't change the type after you've chosen. And then finally, the Parasol token is a very special token that allows you to play 1 extra turn after the very last turn of the game. You're just not able to hunt. But you could use a turn to try and move if you haven't quite made it back to the castle yet. If you're playing the rookie mode of the game, there are a few changes to setup. First, you need to make sure that you're using the side of the board that shows an A in the bottom left corner. In shuffling and dealing out the hunt deck, first find all of the cards that have an A in the top right corner, shuffle and then separate out 2 plus 2 per player. So in our 2-player example, we would separate out 6 cards. Then shuffle all the cards together and place the hunt deck like normal, but place the cards that you set aside on top of the hunt deck to be drawn. Then, when placing cards in the tavern during setup, draw those 3 cards from the bottom of the deck so that you make sure that you don't take any of the A cards that are going to be dealt onto the hunt track. The A cards will allow players to begin with more vampire powers and familiars. Also in the rookie mode during setup, when selecting missions for the public mission spaces, only select missions that have a white title. There are some slight gameplay changes in the rookie mode as well. When you're collecting missions in the rookie mode, you'll simply look at all of the missions on a mission space, pick one, and then put the remaining missions back onto the space. You can't put the missions that you started the game with back on the space like you can in Elder mode. Also, in the rookie mode, players are safe even if they make it back to one of the mountain spaces. They would still be able to be considered for game-winning scores. They would just lose the number of victory points indicated by the space wherever they end their movement. Alright everybody, that was our video. We hope that it was helpful and we hope that it was informative. If you still have any questions about how to play the game, please comment below or email us directly at thedicey@gmail.com. And make sure and connect with us on social media or by visiting our Board Game Geek Guild. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, we'll see you at the table.